I call the honourable member Richard Prosser.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank also the Honourable Damien O'Connor for bringing this matter to the attention of the House. Mr Speaker, it is obvious that all parties in this House do accept that biosecurity is of enormous importance to New Zealand and to our economy. In this day and age where advanced technologies, manufacturing, IT and so forth are touted as being the way of the future, it is still a fact that 75% of New Zealand's economy, one way or another, directly or indirectly, is dependent on agriculture, and for that reason biosecurity is probably the single most important line of defence that New Zealand can have for our economy and for everything else. Mr Speaker, we have heard a lot about reinvestment in biosecurity from this administration. We've not heard a lot about the cuts that preceded that. We have had cuts to frontline services over the last few years, Mr Speaker. We have had a reduction in boots on the ground. We have seen a diminishing of morale amongst frontline biosecurity officers, people who work in customs, people who work for MAF, who work for MPI. They are disillusioned, Mr Speaker, by the lack of resourcing, by the redirection of resourcing in biosecurity, which is moving away from traditional established methods of inspection, methods which they, as professionals on the ground, have had confidence in over the years, and seeing those methods be replaced by a reliance on technology, a reliance on intelligence, a reliance to some degree on untested theory. Mr Speaker, the fact of the matter is that we have now fewer boots on the ground than we did a decade ago. We have seen the results of a reduction, a relaxation of the strenuous efforts made previously around biosecurity. We have seen them with the introduction of the PSA virus and its devastating effects on our kiwifruit industry. We have seen what happens when a fruit fly gets in, and we have no way of knowing how that fruit fly got in. Mr Speaker, I remember back in 1997, when I was a sales rep on the road in central Otago, the rabbit calicivirus was introduced to the South Island. Calicivirus was something which many in the farming industry have been calling for as a method of controlling rabbits. It was investigated, and eventually the government said that the farmers could not have the calicivirus. By that stage, of course, it was out and spreading. It was about 4 months before MAF told the farmers that they couldn't have calicivirus that it was out and spreading on the farms of central Otago and South Canterbury. I remember calling on a farm, I won't reveal the location, where the farmer's wife was out the back of the house with a blender, and she was blending up the internal organs of some rabbits that had died of the virus, and they were creating biocide and painting carrots with them and spreading them on the farms. So, Mr Speaker, back in those days, when there was a great deal more investment made in adequate biosecurity, it was still possible for a virus, an organism like the calicivirus, to be introduced deliberately by people who had an agenda to do so. We are told that the calicivirus came in via two methods, one possibly through a diplomatic bag and the other in a pilot's bag. But the fact of the matter remains that at that time, when the Ministry of Agriculture was better resourced and was better focused on controlling those sorts of threats, that virus still managed to make its way in and still managed to spread and become established. I was told quite proudly by a member of Ministry of Agriculture staff in those days that they had a plan whereby they could put 90 people on the ground anywhere in New Zealand within an hour and a half of an incursion being announced. We could not do that today, Mr Speaker. We simply don't have the resources. Today the door is wide open. The door is wide open through the Smart Gate, which allows passengers carrying Australian and New Zealand passports to enter without being stopped, without being inspected. The door is wide open through containers and machinery arriving in this country without being inspected properly and without being cleaned. There is dirty machinery arriving off ships in this country, Mr Speaker. And the Minister says that it's passport control, not customs, it is all front line. It is all people on the front line. It is all ways of stopping and inspecting goods and passengers as they come across the border. We have to take a holistic approach to this because we are, as an island nation, the only two ways that we can be reached and approached is by sea and by air. So everything, people, freight, they all arrive by sea and by air. It's all crossing the border. We are wide open through fast-track visa arrangements with carriers such as the one that's just been announced with South China Airlines and with their frequent flyers. We have no way of knowing who these people are, what they may or may not be bringing in, and now we're going to start letting them in the same as we're letting Australian and New Zealand passport holders in, without inspecting them. So, as the Honourable Damien O'Connor says, we are now wide open to a foot-and-mouth incursion. And claims of increased spending and increased resourcing around biosecurity even if they're true, is irrelevant if they're not targeted to the right areas. As I say, we do not take account for previous cuts, and we place too much reliance on intelligence. We have a reduction in boots on the ground. I put questions to the Select Committee earlier in the year, Mr Speaker, about what sort of resources the MPI had to counter an incursion. They said that they had their own resources, obviously, and the resources of other government agencies, including the Army, to call on. Well, we all know that the Army itself is undergoing cuts and reductions. It's losing people, it's losing vehicles, it's losing the ability to help in situations like this. And of course, we also face the possibility that there could be deliberate incursions, and other nations, companies perhaps, wanting to make competitive advantage over New Zealand, where we have advantages, where they could seek to destroy those advantages by bringing in any kind of virus that could diminish New Zealand's ability to have a competitive edge. We've seen it work the other way around. We have seen legitimate New Zealand intellectual property be removed from this country through illegitimate means. We've seen, for example, a few years ago where some Chinese officials were stopped taking New Zealand apple budwood out of the country. So if it can work one way, it can work the other, Mr Speaker. No system is 100% effective, this we know. But even with all the protocols in place, something can get through. Without protocols in place, something will get through. Without protocols in place and without proper effective inspections and controls, it's not really a case, it is not a case at all of if, it is a case of when. We will get foot and mouth through this system, Mr Speaker. I recall, again, a number of years ago when I was working in the wine industry, receiving a crate off a carrier of cast iron pipeline fittings. We were putting in an irrigation system, and this crate of pipeline fittings had come in from China. We put the crate on the ground. This is on a vineyard near Wanaka, so we're out in the middle of nowhere, Mr Speaker. We are nowhere near a port of entry. We're nowhere near an inspection facility. We're nowhere near anywhere where we can get fumigation. And as we opened the crate, a spider ran out. Now, I happened to notice the spider, and I happened to know that the crate had come from China. I didn't know what sort of spider it was, but I did know that it could be something dangerous. I happened to be in the right place at the right time to see that spider, and I got on the phone to my boss, got hold of some information on the kind of chemical and the kind of application that we should use to control it, went into town, got the chemical, applied it to the area, and hopefully, fortunately, we prevented something more dramatic from taking hold in that part of New Zealand. But that was a matter of a fortunate accident, Mr Speaker, of me being in the right place at the right time. Without inspections and without proper fumigations and facilities in place at our ports, we can't guarantee that we will always be lucky. The Auditor General's report, Mr Speaker, summarises that MPI is underprepared for potential incursions from some high-risk organisms. It emphasises that not enough priority has been given to planning. It emphasises that the plan for dealing with foot and mouth is inadequate, that staff are not using the new response system to its full potential, that some information systems do not yet link together and information is not used as effectively and as efficiently as it could be, and performance reporting also needs to improve. It is a damning report, Mr Speaker, and New Zealand First has been calling for action on this for over a year. I have a copy, Mr Speaker, of a press release put out by myself at almost this time last year, saying that New Zealand First is calling for an independent inquiry into inadequate biosecurity procedures and staffing levels. We are going over the same ground over and over again, Mr Speaker. We could stand here on this side of the House and berate the government, and deservedly so, for its direction or lack of direction on biosecurity, for the fact that it is not prioritising the spending that it is making in the correct direction. But I think a more constructive approach would be for us to ask, to plead, please, for the government to listen, to read the Auditor General's report properly, to take on board the messages that are contained within that report. Please listen to calls from across the side of the House. Please listen to federated farmers. Please spend the money, spend it in the right place. Put the boots back on the ground, safeguard New Zealand's agriculture and the three-quarters of our economy which depends on it. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
No, Turner Cartney.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. The Auditor General's report on biosecurity